How much does response rate and response time impact your bookings on Airbnb? We just did an analysis on both of those topics, but first I want to explain what each of those means so that it's clear. Response rate is the percentage of time that you responded to a guest's request to book. It's measured as a percent, and you can find it at the bottom of your Airbnb listing. Now, response time is how quickly you are on average to respond to a guest's inquiry. Now, that's measured in 4 different values. Either it's responds in less than an hour, responds within a few hours, responds in the same day, or responds in a few days or more. Those are the 4 values that Airbnb will rate you on. Obviously, the higher the better, and these next videos will explain the impact of both of those metrics. Even if you have Instant Book turned on, if you aren't allowing Instant Book for all guests, some guests are still going to request to book if they don't have the minimum requirements. So this is just tracking what percentage of the time did you respond within that 24-hour time period. Now, most people have 100%, but there are some that are not 100%, and we wanted to track the difference between those that are not 100% compared to those that are 100%. In fact, we actually broke it down into 3 groups. Let's take a look at those 3 groups here. So the 3 groups we broke it into is those that are 100% response rate, and then a second group that are just below 100%, so somewhere between 90 to 99%. So does Airbnb care if you're, is it a big difference if you go from 99 to 100? That's what we wanted to track. And then the third group is 0 to 89. So those that are just really underperforming as far as this goes. So we tracked it against the 4 main booking funnel metrics to find out how this is impacting bookings overall. And what we saw, first of all, as we look at impressions. Now, an impression, I like to remind people, an impression is every time you appear in search. So whether you're on page 1 or page 15, if you got in search, you've got an impression. So when we look at how a good how a good response rate impacts impressions, what we see is that those underperforming properties got far fewer daily impressions than those that had a higher response rate. Those that have a higher response rate, it's pretty much a toss-up. Whether you're 90 to 100%, there's no benefit from going from 99 to 100. Both of those see significantly more traffic, or I should say more search impressions, than those at a lower rate. So that could just be a result that lower performing properties just don't have as good of a rate. There could be a number of factors, but overall, there does seem to be an increase from just better response rate. First page impression rate, surprising. This is telling us how well you're ranking in search. There's not a significant difference here. So even if you go from really poor response rate to 100% response rate, you pretty much get the same amount of rank. So it's not driving rank. For click rate, there is an increase from like really performing properties to 90%. But after 90%, there's really no improvement in click rate. And that makes sense because guests can't really even see your response rate in their search results. So it's really not going to drive your clicks. But the really interesting thing is what happens when you look at conversion rate. And this makes complete sense because if you're not responding, you're not going to convert. So those that are in the 0 to 89% response rate have about a 0.5% conversion rate. Now compare that to those that respond within 90 to 99%, and they see a 0.8% conversion rate. And then those that respond 100% of the time within 24 hours have a 1% conversion rate. So let's sum this up and look at the overall net benefit of responding quickly, or having a 100% response rate. If you go from a really poor, so 89% or below, to 90%, you see about 116% overall increase in bookings, okay? And then when you go from 90 to 99 up to 100%, you see about a 26% additional increase. And most of that is coming from the conversion rate. A little bit maybe from the top of the funnel, but mostly it's because guests are just more likely to book when they get a response. It makes a lot of logical sense, but a pretty big impact if you respond, and you respond consistently to guests. How does responding quickly to guests impact your bookings? We just ran the analysis on over 5,000 properties on IntelliHost to figure out how it drives the 4 booking funnel metrics on Airbnb. If you're not familiar with the funnel booking metrics, they are impressions, meaning total times you appear in search, first page impressions, number of times you get on first page, clicks, self-explanatory, and bookings. Self-explanatory, okay? So there's those 4 steps that every guest takes to book your property. So let's dive into the numbers and see what happens when you respond within an hour to your guests. Now, we broke this up into 2 groups. Now, there's actually technically like 4 or 5 groups. Airbnb tracks whether you respond within an hour, whether you respond within a few hours, whether you respond same day, or whether you respond within a few days or more. So there's kind of those 4 main categories. We just broke it up into 2 to analyze the difference between those 2 groupings. So let's dive in and see what it looks like. For those that are responding less than an hour, so anytime less than an hour, could be a few days, could be within the same day, the average daily impressions is 274 per day impressions that they appeared in search. For those that respond within an hour, 319. Now, this isn't something you can actually filter for, so we're not exactly sure if it's just because these properties overall are just doing better or they're better performing properties, or if Airbnb is actually rewarding these properties. Could be either one, but on average, the top line impressions is about 16% higher for those that respond within an hour, okay? So then let's look at, when you look at first page impression rate, there is a slight bump on first page impression rate. It looks like Airbnb may be rewarding guests for responding quickly, but the difference isn't huge. We're talking about a 3% increase in first page impression rate. Click rate, we see a pretty significant increase, which I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure why. It could just be because the properties that respond within an hour care a lot more about their property. They've got better cover images, things like that. But you can't actually see the response time in the search results. So it doesn't necessarily explain why the click rate is higher. But when you look at conversion rate, this is where the biggest difference comes in. And this does make a lot of sense. I mean, it makes intuitive sense. Those that take longer than an hour to respond get about a 0.8% conversion rate on average, compared to those that respond within an hour have a 1% conversion rate. So if you want a really quick way, that's a 25% increase, right? So there you have it. If you want to know what else works on Airbnb, hit subscribe.